So since y'all don't like my TTS things that I be doing, I'm going to read this to you myself because I'll be honest with you. I really, really think we need to start thinking and thinking on a different level about stuff, right? And I know my subs do this all the time. Like the guys who watch me, they watch me religiously are individuals who actually think outside of the box. But I'm doing this not just for us in the end of the day, right? This is for everybody to make us have a different thought about things. Now, this guy's answers aren't always the solution, but we have to start thinking and grabbing all the information possible as a whole. Because if we don't stand here and take advantage of every resource we have, right, it's going to end up crushing. We'll end up being crushed in the end. So, I'm going to read this to you. We're going to go through this, right? I'm probably going to comment as we go through, right? But hopefully y'all enjoy this. You know what I'm saying? That's kind of my mentality. Let me know what you think in the comment section. Make sure you like, share, and subscribe to this video, please. Make sure if you're you're new around here, drop a sub. I do lots of news and, lots of geopolitical stuff, economic stuff. I do all the stuff all the time. You know what I'm saying? A lot of good information on this channel. Just check it out. You know what I'm saying? Give me a chance. We'll get to it. All right. As breathing and consciousness return. The big things are useful but hard. The small things are easy but useless. This is from the Gray Mirror SUBSTACK, June 23rd, 2021. Solzhenitsyn wrote a different essay with the same title, but for the same situation. The rules for a discourse of a return to collective reason. Within the context of some baffling, nonsensical, and unprecedented historical moment, a world so confusing we cannot even begin to think within it until we first teach ourselves how to think without it. In his solution from the hard-to-find anthologies Under the Rubble, Solzhenitsyn invents a principle of intellectual non-collaboration for unconditional refusal to accept the purported frame of the moment, then uses this rage to gut Andrew Sarkov, hero of the moderate dissidents, like a hog for his craven, pointless parrotings of regime TV talking points. It is impossible to compete with Solzhenitsyn, but let's try. For we are in the same situation, under the rubble but alive for now. Maybe a better analogy is a surfer held down by a big wave or two. Should he swim up to the surface? Of course, but he has a big problem. He does not know which way is up. He is tangled in a rip of currents and foam. He has been spun around too many times. Gravity always points down, so fighting away from it is always up. But fighting gravity feels just like fighting some current. The upswelling current would save him. It feels just like his own weight. He swims for the bottom. What the surfer needs to do is the same thing a pilot needs to do in a cloud. Ignore all sensory evidence and intuitive awareness and rely solely on his instruments. Even a surfer, if surfing responsibly, has one instrument, his leash. This binds his foot to a board, a stick of foam few waves can long submerge. The held-down surfer must climb his leash. As breathing and consciousness return. To climb the leash is to think positively from first principle, without any intuitive, traditional, or supernatural assumptions. We are thinking about government. We are practicing political philosophy. There are two kinds of political philosophy. Pure political philosophy, which is always cool, and applied political philosophy, which is much more interesting when you just woke up 15 feet underwater, tangled in ice-brown kelp, in an ice-brown kelp tornado full of rocks. Applied political philosophy tries to answer three questions. First, where we are. Second, where should we be? Third, how do we get there? We can take no responsible political action until we are confident of our answers to all three questions. The third question can only be addressed once both the first and second are answered. Both the first and second can be addressed independently, and both are multiple choice. Since there are 9 forms of government, we cannot climb the political leash until we are certain that we have the right answer of 81 possible choices. Basic D&D had 3 alignments: chaotic, neutral, and lawful. Well, this is the 9 forms of government. Chaotic, neutral, and lawful. Later, as Demerge Gyjax had the genius of idea of adding a second dimension: good, neutral, and evil. This yielded 9 alignments. Enough one would hope for the nerdiest of nerds. As Aristotle explains, there are 3 forms of structure of political power: monarchy, the power of one, oligarchy, the power of a few, and democracy, the power of many. Then Aristotle anticipates Gygax, adding a dimension of good and bad, yielding 6 alignments: monarchy or tyranny, aristocracy or oligarchy, and democracy or ocharchy. Ochalacracy? Ochalacracy. Yeah. This was probably a mistake, at least. It's generally a mistake to miss ought and is. Our taxonomy of 3 forms asks whether regimes rule well or poorly. Of course, any form of regime can rule well or poorly. Our concern is the structure in the regime. And if we thought the present regime governed well, we would not be asking these questions. And if we designed the next regime to govern badly, we would be madmen. The moral balance of regime is not relevant to its structural taxonomy. Hang on. Well, Aristotle also thought his girls had 28 teeth. The modern media audience is worse. It only takes 3 of Aristotle's 6 forms: tyranny, aristocracy, ochalacracy. It calls these dictatorship, science, and politics. Ochalacracy. Ochalacracy? I'm not really sure what that is, to be honest with you. The public lacks the labels, and they would need to imagine monarchy or democracy that performs well. Its label for oligarchy it just describes as the ideal that good performance would deliver, although it at least has alternative pejoratives like bureaucracy. And anyway, we still need a second dimension to classify forms of regimes. There are only 3 forms of power, but there are 9 forms of regime. Since every regime gets to both pick ceremonial and operational forms. The ceremonial form of the regime, it is its legitimating principle, the form of power which its subjects consider ritually correct. The operational form of regime is how power, that is, final control of the government decisions, actually operates. If ceremonial and operational forms match, we can call the regime simple. If they do not match, if there are significant ceremonial elements without operational relevance, it is complex. For obvious reasons, there can be multiple ceremonial forms, but not multiple operational forms. England, it's complicated. Ceremonially, England since the medieval times has always been a nation under the rule of law, and their laws were made by Parliament. Ceremonial, at least in a sense, England has always been an oligarchy, a parliament that is few, but operationally the relevance of Parliament to English governance has varied. While the Tudors had parliaments, parliamentary history is not an important part of Tudor history. Generally, a Tudor parliament was sort of a supreme Soviet. Technically, the boss of the general secretary, actually the instrument of the general secretary. There are exceptions, of course. Hang on. Elizabeth's parliament is not Henry VII's, but supposing the argument's sake that no Tudor parliament dared to seriously displease its monarch, we can define Tudor England as a monarchical oligarchy, which may have ceremonial work like the England of Gladstone or at least Simon de Montfort, but operationally have more in common with the French of Louis XIV, and the same is true. Generally, the Roman Empire, which never stopped calling itself Respublica, and even in the life of those now living, FDR's Congress approached this level. Basically, Congress was a rubber stamp for FDR. From the perspective of applied political philosophy, once we identify a regime as this type, we see immediately why we need to climb the leash. If we think of a monarchical oligarchy, it was a simple oligarchy. When we aim in any other way at power, we will aim at the ceremonial oligarchy rather than its operational monarchy. It is technically possible to gain power in a Roman Empire by being elected to the Roman Senate, sure, as long as you include a second problem of restoring the Roman Republic. But since the Respublica is operationally a military monarchy, better to rise up through the legions. Working within the system is swimming up, not down. It means you have only one problem to solve. Regime change is sometimes preceded by reactivating ceremonial organs most of the time. Such organs just deflect naive residents away from power. And the resistance is naive that cannot classify the regime. It is resisting, and therefore interprets the inactive organ as active. Identifying operational structures. One infallible test of the operational relevance of an organ is simply whether the regime could operate in a normal or reasonably normal way without it. Of course, England also has a ceremonial monarchy. Today, the UK could operate normally without Elizabeth II, but Elizabeth's England could not operate normally without Elizabeth I. When the structures of monarchy, oligarchy, and democracy are generally operating, the spirit of the era takes on an unmistakable historical odor of the operational form. We can almost learn to smell an operating monarchy, oligarchy, or democracy. Each form has characteristic virtues and vices. None is perfect as none is none is unredeemed. The spirit of monarchy. The spirit of monarchy is the unity of authority and responsibility. Monarchy exists wherever one person controls an organization and is responsible for its performance by delegating this unity to smaller sub-problems. One human being can effectively manage hundreds of thousands. The hallmark of monarchy is hierarchy. Power flows exclusively from the top down. The smaller its final decision process, the faster and more effectively an organization can act and change. And one person is the smallest possible process. It is no exaggeration to say that all normal and healthy organizations are monarchies. Drive a car to the movies, you go out to eat, and then drive a car to the movies, then go out to eat. You will experience a performance of three monarchs: a CEO, a director, and a chef. A monarchist is just someone who thinks the government should be managed like any ordinary human organization. As I said, his solutions aren't our solutions in the end of the day. The weakness of sovereign monarchy is accountability, and at the corporate level, it is easy for a board of directors, a shareholders, a customers, and or government to hold a CEO accountable, since the legal rules of the corporation are enforced by a higher layer of sovereignty. Sovereign accountability is much harder to implement. Any organ that can select the sovereign tends to become the sovereign. Almost everyone admits that the best government is a benevolent dictatorship, by which they mean a normal, healthy monarchy. The past is full of monarchs and dynasties. Healthy monarchies abound, some performing, some approaching perfect. Many dynasties have had good runs. None has lasted forever. The problem, in fact, remains unsolved, but no one has tried to solve it in a long time. The spirit of oligarchy. The spirit of oligarchy marries the wisdom of crowds with the inequality of humanity. As compared to a single monarch, a ruling oligarchy has made of a few of the best people can have much higher aggregate IQ, possibly higher average IQ, certainly much higher aggregate expertise, and effectively infinite redundancies against biological accidents. There are uncountable forms of oligarchy, which are each with its own selection process. The oligarchs can be selected by any or all of heredity, wealth, election, or examination. The college admission circus of America is the imperial examination game of China. The hallmark of oligarchy is rank and process. Aristotle should have left oligarchy as a neutral term with aristocracy as the positive and the bureaucracy as the negative. An oligarchy is a regime in which all legitimate final decisions are taken through regular procedures whose participants are qualified by some personal rank. There is no oligarchy without some sense of rank, formal or informal, hereditary or awarded, which defines the few. Often an oligarchical organization is tree-shaped, like a hierarchical organization. This is an illusion. It is not command that flows down, but process that flows up. The trunk of the tree does not exist to command its leaves, but to handle all exceptions that arise in the normal procedural functioning of the leaves. The advantage of oligarchy is its enormous stability and general sanity, whereas an insane monarch can be a real concern. Individual madmen are of no concern to any serious oligarchy. An oligarchy cannot go mad unless the whole society goes mad. The disadvantage of oligarchy is that power corrupts thought. Once an institution is saturated with power, its marketplace of ideas is no longer a level playing field. Ideas which grant or suggest power have a competitive advantage. These ideas will prosper both in the oligarchy and in the ruling class around it until the whole society goes mad. I'll read that one more time. The disadvantage of oligarchy is that power corrupts thought. Once an institution is saturated with power, its marketplace of ideas is no longer a level playing field. Ideas which grant or suggest power to the oligarchy have a competitive advantage. These ideas will prosper both in the oligarchy and the ruling class around it until the whole society goes mad. It's highly important to understand. The spirit of democracy. The spirit of democracy unifies the power and the innocence of the masses. A million people can do anything. A million people can be guilty of nothing. Since the masses have no power, the masses cannot be corrupted by power. It is always the foolish and childlike masses who concede that the emperor has no clothes. The hallmark of democracy is collectivism, the ability to join and create communities which collectively defend their collective interests. Such communities, Tocqueville's voluntary organizations, for which America is famous in her age of democracy, are not to be confused with activist groups, which are organized top-down for the purpose of coordinating and or impacting others. Activism is an oligarchical phenomenon. Authentic democracy is inherently selfish. The collective that acts democratically is acting on its own behalf. While it's not always good to be selfish, nor is it always bad. Also, the actual effects of collective action do not always have to match their prior intent. The advantage in democracy is that this force is available in all but the most dystopic of technical tyrannies. Democracy does not even need formal elections. A million people can do anything. The USSR was rebooted by democracy, not elections. The disadvantages of democracy are almost too numerous to count. Besides its limited capacity to grasp complex ideas or follow complex plans, it has unlimited capacity to grasp bad ideas and follow bad plans. The mob's greatest weakness is its limited energy and its short attention span. It can take anything but hold nothing. Democracy is an inherently acute force. Regimes that try to bottle and institutionalize the democratic energy tend to slip into either oligarchy or monarchy. It is difficult to get large numbers of people to chronically care, and nor is the capacity for caring evenly distributed across human space and time. Where are we? The spirit of monarchy is nowhere to be found in the American regime, not at least in the public sector. We can clearly see this by contrast to the private sector, which is full of the spirit of monarchy. More in the smallest, most dynamic areas, individual responsibility is almost non-existent in the public sector. Everything is a process, even military and police action. Although inherently kinetic, it is wrapped in a process of law. The spirit of democracy is so evident to Tocqueville 2 centuries ago is almost gone. Americans are no longer collectivists. They no longer are addicted to joining and founding mutual societies designed to use collective action to advance the collective interests of their members. For instance, if labor unions did not exist, no one today would invent them, let alone Elks, Kiwanis, Oddfellows, Freemason. Religion itself feels like an anachronism in America today. We do see democracy as an existing force, but in both energy and quality, this force, which most call it populism or even just politics, has grown perceptibly weaker. Even from the Tea Party of 10 years ago to the MAGA of today, there is no weakening, and the preposterous reign of Trump was a shadow of the Reagan Revolution, and the undercard is dead. Every non-presidential election has lost all emotional interest. And even in the long run, populism always loses, which makes it hard to stay popular. Even the Reagan Revolution was written water. Even after all those great speeches about the People's Park, no one once reasonably expects that collective action could accomplish anything. Why would anyone participate in collective action? What pundit, philosopher, or prophet could honestly promote it? No one loves a loser. Whereas the force of oligarchy is the very soul and backbone of power. For example, if science conflicts with politics, which should prevail? When we say politics, we mean democracy. When we say science, we mean three things: the ideal of objective knowledge, a process in which should yield this ideal, and an institution which follows the process. When we say institution, we mean oligarchy. So if science always beats politics, oligarchy always beats democracy. While oligarchy can work very well, it is disheartening that it must conceal itself in this way. Indeed, the present of multi-party politics is long touted as the essential distinction between Western and Eastern wings of the progressive revolution. Both essential oligarchical regimes, one ceremonial democratic, the other operationally monarchical, were always told that they would converge. Perhaps in the end they did. We therefore categorize our regime as an oligarchical democracy. While its ceremonial principle is democracy, its operating principle is oligarchy. Just as the Roman Empire defines itself as a republic, the American post-war oligarchy defines itself as a democracy, or in the third world, civil society. Membership in the society is a rank, which it makes it an oligarchy. Literal democracy, electing politicians who represent the citizens and serve their interest, is called politics or populism. Politics has long since stopped working, but it's not quite yet illegal, and it can be genuinely annoying to the powers that be. Thus, in America today, there remains a real tension between oligarchy and democracy. The second question in applied political philosophy is the revolution of this tension. What is the next form of regime? I think we're going to end there because we're at about 20 minutes. Joe, look, it's a lot of information. Listen to it a few times. There's a lot of really good information there. And we will get back to this tomorrow and drop another verse on you. All right? Peace.